And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 186. Today we're going to be talking about, well, how to make anything look interesting. There's a big thing with photography, which generally speaking is we tend to think of photography is about the thing we're photographing. But how we photograph it is what makes all the difference as to whether it becomes an interesting photograph or not. I've been sort of throwing out a quote the last few weeks now since I stumbled across it. It goes something like, a photograph is not about what something looks like, it's about what something looks like as a photograph. So today I'm going to be looking specifically about how you can take anything, or in this case I'm going to probably use it, well, I am going to use a mug or cup, and show you how you can make even the most everyday item look a little bit more interesting. So that's pretty much what we're about. Stick around. Not that one. Try this one. So yes, here we are live, as you can tell, on YouTube. If you happen to be watching live, leave me a comment. Tell me where you are. Tell me what the weather's up to. Tell me something interesting about your life, if you wish. We are, currently here in Castle Douglas. A bit overcast, a little bit cloudy, might drizzle a bit. Not totally sure. So yes, leave a comment. Tell me you're here. Tell me what you're up to. And yes, so today we're going to be talking about the idea of photographing pretty much anything, and for the mundane, the everyday, how can you make something like that look interesting? And the main thing about this is because if you can work that out, then it applies to pretty much everything. What I will also be doing is, certainly looks like sound there was blasting out a bit. What I will also be doing is, sorry, just adjust those sound levels a little bit. It looks like I'm peaking out slightly too loud. Okay. Try again. Also, Janet was asking me about the notion of taking photos of an eclipse. There's one due in North America next month, and so she was showing me a filter, telling me what camera she had. So I'm going to talk a little bit about photographing an eclipse and a couple of thoughts about that. So stick around for that too. Meanwhile, I see we have a few people in already. Robert says, howdy all from Texas, 61 degrees Fahrenheit or 15C. April says, greetings from a beautiful, sunny, mild day on Long Island, New York. 54 degrees here already. Sandra says, hello everyone from a mild and sunny Birmingham, and my first podcast as a married woman. Oh, congratulations. Well, I do hope you haven't interrupted your honeymoon for this podcast. There are some things that take more important, higher priority. Not many, but I would let you off your podcast on this one. Congratulations, Sandra. That's wonderful news. And a bunch of people are now saying thank you, or congratulations rather to Sandra. And Nadia says, hi everyone from an overcast Fife. Susan says, hello everyone from a cloudy but not too cold Kakubri. Janet says, hi from Mississauga, mild, and we had a foggy, misty morning but now clearing up. Rosemary says, good morning all from a dusting of snow in Washington State. And then there's several more congratulations for Sandra. Jack's joined us and says hello from a sunny Florida. Omaha Hilo. It's a new one. Welcome. Says hi everyone from a cloudy UK. Welcome Omaha Hilo. Peter says hello from Hunmanby near Filey. Stacey says good morning from a sunny, warm 50 degrees, going to be about 60 degrees today. Marilyn says good afternoon from a sunny, cold Colorado. Meg says hello everyone. Stacey says, what is that, a Star Wars figure next to the wood guy? Ah, okay, back here. Not quite. Next to it we have a little robot figure which my grandson gave me, and also we have a Lego Batman keyring. Which was a rather wonderful Christmas present I got. So yeah, they're little sort of stack building up there. At some point I might have to rearrange them into some kind of still life formation. What else do we have here? Congratulations. Sandra says, going on the honeymoon on 14th of March. Oh, okay, got a couple of weeks away then. Questions going off. Don joins us, and for Don Quilty from Northumberland says, my wife says photography is a mugs game. I disagree. Well, yes, we'll be photographing the mugs and talking about that one. And Sandra says she's off to Boa Vista, which is part of Cape Verde. Okay, right, so let's have a little chat about today. What am I talking about? Like I say, a little bit later I will be answering Janet's question about photographing the eclipse, and a couple of things you might need to take into consideration if you are going to be attempting that, either next month in North America or anywhere else in the world at any other time that it happens to be appearing. But what we're going to start with is this idea of photography. So to go back to that quote, and I will say it again because it's one worth just really embedding in your head, which is a photograph is not about what something looks like, it's about what something looks like as a photograph, right? And I think too often we get caught up in this idea of trying to create a direct representation of something. So, here's a mug. This is a photograph of the mug. The photograph represents the mug in the same way that a passport photo represents the human face. And a passport photo has a very specific role. It is there to help somebody else who doesn't know who you are, who hasn't seen you before, look at the photo, compare you to the photo, and decide that you are the person who the photo is saying that you are. Okay? Or the photo is a good representation of who you are saying that it is of. If you know what I mean. The role of a passport photo. But the part we also know, the passport photo, quite apart from tending to make us look a bit like a criminal, is the most unimaginative of all forms of portrait. Okay? Almost any other kind of photo of a person is more interesting than a passport photo. So a photo isn't really photography as we do photography, creative photography. Photography where we want to improve our skills. Photography where we might stick our pictures into competitions. Photography where we might join others in a camera club and compare notes and try and improve our photography. Photography where we might want to print it out and stick it on the wall, or photography even where we might want to set up our own business and get other people to pay us for our photography. This requires more than just creating an accurate representation of something. Now, this is a really important thing, because what it means is it's not just about pointing the camera in the direction and going click. It is about the idea of composition, of light, of context, line, form, story, narrative. Okay? And narrative and story, feeling, mood, this is what any photograph ultimately is about. Some form of communication. Okay? That whenever you take a photo, somebody is going to be looking at that photo later. At least that's what we're trying to do. Whether that photo is for us to look at later, or that photo is to show to a friend or a partner, or to put into a competition, or show to friends at a camera club, or to print out and try and sell, we are trying to create a mood, a feeling, a thought, an idea in the viewer's head. Okay, so that when they look at it, we transmit some kind of feeling, emotion, thought, or idea to that person. Okay. Now, this is true of any photograph we take. So the important thing, the really important thing, is if we are going to try and do that, what tools do we have at our disposal to pass the message along that we actually want to pass along? Okay, and this is really what I'm going to be talking about today. This is very much a kind of a back to basics. What's photography actually all about? And I'm going to run through a few ideas. Okay, a couple of just generally speaking, chats now to Sandra about whereabouts it is she's heading for. Right. Okay, so let me pull up an idea. What I'm going to do, obviously we could talk about absolutely anything. So what I've decided to do is take the idea of a mug, okay? Because basically a cup or a mug is the kind of thing that we all tend to have kicking about for something, right? But it's the most mundane, everyday item we use, okay? But it doesn't matter. This could be a piece of string, it could be a cardboard tube, it could be a knife or a fork, right? the point is that you don't necessarily have to have something exotic, something amazing, something unusual to photograph in order to create an interesting photograph. So let's show you a very basic photograph. Very basic photograph of a mug. Here's a basic photograph of a mug. Now this mug happens to be Megalicious. Okay, so this is my daughter Meg, who you know watches these podcasts and joins in the chat. Meg. A little while ago, she was going to set up a wee business. It didn't happen because COVID hit. There's a whole great long story behind that. However, before COVID hit and everything wiped out, we were in the process of designing a logo, and we had a friend design the logo for us, and we got some mugs printed up with Megalicious on it. Now, so that's the basic story behind Megalicious. So this is Meg's mug. Okay. Now, as a mug goes, as a photo goes, this is quite a good representation of what Meg's mug looks like. Okay. It's a mug. You can see it's a mug. It's shot against a plain white background. There's a nice even light around it. So there's just enough shadow in there for you to be able to tell that it's sort of curved and hollow in the inside up the top, and that you can just make out where the shadow falls, so you can see that there's a handle, and that it's three-dimensional, so you can tell that it's a tube type shape, and you can see the logo clearly. So this is your passport equivalent of this mug. If you were selling this on eBay or on Amazon or anywhere else, then if somebody saw this photo and then they got the mug, they wouldn't be thinking, hang on a sec, this mug doesn't look like anything in that I thought I was buying. They would feel, yes, I've got what I expected to get. The only thing you don't have with this is any real sense of size. But most of us have a general sense of what a mug is, and if I was selling this, I would have the height and width dimensions on it, okay, along with whether it was dishwasher proof. So that's fine as an identification tool, but it doesn't really show us anything interesting about the mug. There's no story of the mug. Now, there's a story about the logo, but that's not about the mug, okay? So what else can we do with this mug? Now, the minute we decide that we're going to, say, change the lighting. So instead of having an all-round light, what I'm now doing is I'm using a window light. I've got the same white background. I'm shooting from the same angle. Got the same dimensions. Same point of view, same camera settings, basically, same aperture setting, shutter speed setting, or what have you, except for the fact that it's now lit by window light. And this, just purely by changing the lighting settings, we've gone from this to this, and this suddenly feels slightly more interesting. Okay? And it's really important to understand that just by changing the light, by deciding to go for a side light rather than an overall bounced light, I think with this one I had a diffuser on top of a flash which was pointed at the ceiling, bouncing up. I had a piece of kitchen roll off on one side to kind of act as a slight reflector, pulling back in, so you get this all-round light. There's not a lot in the way of shadow. Now we have shadow, now we have depth, now we have something which is fractionally more interesting than the previous one. Okay? What else can we do with this? Okay, so we've changed the lighting. What if we change our point of view? What if we change our angle on it? So now what I'm doing is I'm looking at it from above. Oh, sorry, come back here. And now we've got exactly the same mug, exactly the same lighting as this one, but now I'm just shooting from overhead. Okay, and shooting from overhead, instead of the shadow just being a slight bit going off there, we've now got this long line coming out from it. Okay, this changes it again. This is now miles away from this. It's the same cup, shot from roughly about the same distance, but with different lighting and a different angle. We've now gone into something really quite different. Okay, and this is with the handle behind the mug compared to where the light source is. Okay, what if we just turn the cup so that the handle moves out into the light? Well, as soon as we do that, now we've changed the shadow. And this, in turn, has a different feel to this. It's not necessarily say one's better than the other, but it's different. Okay? This has a very streamlined horizontal thing. This breaks it up, and we now have a curve in the shadow, which pulls away. So, by changing the light source, by changing the angle, by just turning the cup, suddenly we are creating a different mood, a different feel, which is the truth here, which is the real mug. They are all real. They are all, this notion that the camera never lies, as we know, biggest piece of BS ever said about photography. The camera is incapable of telling the truth, as in the whole truth, because you are only taking it from one angle under one set of conditions for a fraction of a second. This is as true as the first one, except for the fact that it feels completely different. If you had, in fact, you might not even know the first mug was the same as this one if you hadn't already seen the sequence. Okay? So, it becomes a really important point here, that this notion of a simple thing of change of point of view and a change of the lighting dramatically changes your impression of the mug, your feel of the mug, your mood towards the mug, how you relate to that mug. Okay? So, what else can we do with this mug? Well, what if we put something in it? At the moment, this is an empty mug. Now I fill it, so I put coffee in it. That changes the mood and feel as well. Okay? Now we know there's something in it, we relate to it. We relate to an empty mug in one way. We relate to a mug that is full in a slightly different way. Now, I happen to have coffee in this, but what if it was hot chocolate and you had cream or marshmallows or sprinkles on top? What if it was lemonade? That again, you would have, the light would interact with the liquid in a different way. Or what if the coffee has been drunk and you have residue? So now we've just got the remains of coffee grounds sitting in there. That has a completely different feel to one that is full and ready to drink. Okay? All I'm doing at this point is making one step at a time difference. Okay. Now, another thing we could do with this, actually no, I'll come back to that. Right. So, then there's this idea of, let's do another bit where we take this residue and then we just change our point of view again. We come down to here. Now this mug looks quite different again. Those coffee grounds coming out don't necessarily look particularly pleasant. Perhaps what you're really thinking at this point is, what we really need is to stick it in the sink, right? So this is exactly the same lighting conditions, exactly, the same situation. All I've done is I've changed the angle from which I'm taking the photograph, right? And I might have turned the mug slightly in order to get a better shot. So, point of view, lighting, content, context. What's in the mug is giving you a context, okay? You have an empty mug, you have something ready to drink, you have something that was drunk. You change your point of view. Each of these is giving you a totally different feel to what the mug is like. Let's change the point of view again. Let's shoot it from underneath. So now it's sitting right on the edge of the table. In fact, it's sort of balanced on top of this large A3 sketchbook, which is what I was using just to use as a white backdrop earlier. It's the same thing. Okay, now in this case, what's happening is we've got a strong white line, which is the reflection of the window light that's coming in. But this looking down, looking up from a low point of view, looking up towards the mug, again gives us a different mood and feel to the same thing, okay? So this is all changing what we do with it. Now, okay, what else can we do with a mug? Let's say we were going to pour water into it, okay? So now I've just taken the cup over to the sink. We've got the window behind it. You can see pots and pans sitting about the place. Okay, and here we have water pouring into the mug. Now, shutter speed, right? At this point, what I've got is I've got this going at, what are my readings here? f4.5, 200th of a second, ISO, is that right? No, sorry. No, I was looking at the wrong one there. No, sorry, f4.5, 1/800th of a second, okay? 1/800th of a second, and that is freezing the water as it's coming out to create these beautiful reflective, refractive patterns. Now, it also means the ISO is quite 100. I've got about an 8000 ISO on this. Doesn't really matter, but what it's doing is it's kind of freezing the water. But if I go a step further, if I really ramp that up to 3200th of a second, now at this point, the water itself as it's pouring is sort of frozen in droplets. So the shutter speed at which you decide to shoot at now has an effect. The water here is looking more like some kind of plastic cling film or something that's, you know, it's frozen so much. Now, very, very high, so we're up to 12,800 on this. But in terms of what's going on, Meg's helping me here. She's pouring the water out of the kettle. She's taking it higher so that we're getting these, the water splashing and starting to bounce and bubble, but it's catching it in a frozen moment. Now, if you were to do that with a very slow shutter speed, say you were to do that over 2 or 3 seconds, everything would become very smoothed out. Okay, so now what we're talking about is your shutter speed. The amount of time it takes for the light to go into your camera when you go click, freezes or smooths out anything that might be moving in or around the mug. That in turn then changes your perception of what's going on. Okay, so we're now up to a few different things that are going on. We've got the notion of angle, we've got the notion of light, we've got the notion of what happens to be in it, and even what our camera settings are in terms of shutter speed. Okay? So now what we can do, what else can we do? We can play around with the context a little bit more. Where is this mug going to be? Now this mug here, and we've now currently got just sitting on the edge of the sink, in a kind of domestic kitchen scene here. But supposing we decide to have it on a rack. We've got in our kitchen the cupboards overhang a little bit, and then we've got screws pushed into the underside of the cupboard just to hang the mugs on. And so here we have the Megalicious cup sitting in amongst other cups. It's my favourite little espresso cup from Claire Dawdry, who made that. There's one of Meg's favourite cups behind her flamingo mug as well. So now what we've got is we've got the mug sitting in amongst other mugs. We kind of changed that context of it. Alternatively, we turn the camera, and here aperture makes a difference, a depth of focus. So the mugs are the same. We've still got our flamingo mug and our little espresso cup and what have you, but now this one is sitting behind it. The focal point is on the front edge of the cup here, but it means that by the time you get to the cups in front, all the cups behind, they've gone out of focus. So you can play around with your aperture settings. A wider aperture is going to give you a narrower depth of focus, which is going to create more blur either side of where you've decided to focus it. Or you might decide to have a narrow aperture and have the whole rack in focus. How's that going to change your mood and feel of the photo, of the mug? Okay, what about then the idea of the mug actually in use? So here, my wonderful assistant here is now about to take a drink from the mug. Okay, so here's Meg, and what we can see is we've got the mug, it's coming up towards the mouth. Now we've got a mug in action. Okay, Meg is here, but the photo isn't so much about Meg, the photo is about, it's the mug that's the key point of the photo. But it is about the fact that it's a mug which is something which is being used. Now I've got exactly the same kitchen window light. All this is happening about a foot and a half above the point where the water was dripping into it. So you can see the sink is just, and the wash stuff is just down in the bottom, just below, out of focus. Okay. Or let's try something else. So here's Meg. Meg holding the mug. However, with a photo like this photo isn't about the mug. This photo is about Meg. Okay, and this is a really important thing to understand, that when you're talking about what is your narrative is about, in this case, is about Meg holding the mug. Whereas all I do here is change my point of focus. Now the narrative is about the mug. It's the mug that's in focus. Meg is out of focus. So the story here is about the mug, and Meg is the supporting actor, the supporting prop to the narrative of the mug. So here's a mug that will be used. Here's a mug that can be used. Here's a mug that is being used. As opposed to, this is about Meg, who happens to have a mug in her hand. This is about the mug, who happens to have Meg holding it. Okay, so understanding the balance of when you put something else into the picture, it immediately creates a relationship. There's a relationship going on between the different elements that happen to be in that picture. So it's important to understand that if your photo is supposed to be about the mug, that it isn't overpowered, or so that the mug becomes a supporting part rather than the main part of the photo. Okay, so as well as the notion of camera settings, lighting, point of view, context, there's also this bit of what's featuring in this. Is the mug still the main story, or is it now just a support part player in somebody else's story? In the way that this is, the mug is only playing a supporting role to the photograph of Meg, whereas in this, Meg is playing the supporting role to the part of the mug. Okay, so when you come to take your photos, it becomes really important to understand what it is you're photographing. Now, sometimes what your photograph is about is specifically between the relationship between 2 items, 3 items or more. When we were doing the still life challenge and the still life photography we were talking about last month, this was about creating a balance between the different items and then a flow and a movement between the different items so that you could take in all the items and their relationship to each other through light and line and form and composition. Right? But if you are deciding that there is just a specific thing that you are photographing, again, doesn't matter whether it's a pencil or a piece of string or a mug, then you need to understand, if you're trying to convey something about that your other props are there to enhance it, not to detract or overwhelm what it is you're trying to do. Okay? So is all this making sense? I hope this is all making sense. We got any more comments? A couple of people have said, Fiji's joined us from a warm Chennai in India. Don says, excellent logo. Megan says she's also got that logo on an apron as well, which is, yes, she does. Okay, lots of comments about mugs and holidays as well to Florida and flamingos. Okay. It's about Rosemary saying, this is such a great step-by-step process, especially the thought press. Thanks so much, Kim. Baby granddaughter is now awake. I'll catch up on the rest on replay. Oh, okay, carry on. Right, so let's carry on then. Robert says, don't forget black and white as well. Susan says, it is indeed making sense, Kim. You'll have noticed I've gone rather quiet, just enthralled. Oh, well, that's rather nice. Okay, so let's go back then to the notion of the mug and how it's being used. Where was I? Yeah, let's flip back to Meg for here for the moment. No, okay, let's do something else. So now what we could do if we wanted, we could play with, yeah, let's just show you a little bit of editing. Okay, so let's say we were to, no, not that one. Let's just go for the empty mug. No, actually, I tell you what, let's just do the one with the coffee in, I think. So let's take this mug, right, and then let's open this in Photoshop. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an old trick that I've done before, but here we have this notion of the mug on a plain background. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to extend out that background. So I will change this to generative expand. I think so, yeah. And let's say I do this, and we'll place it, we'll do a rule of thirds. We'll place the mug directly in that crossing point and hit enter. Maybe I should do content aware fill instead. We'll see how this goes. Yeah, this is going to get bigger and bigger. Yeah, there we go. So now we can start moving into the notion of minimalism or negative space. So let's take this and make it bigger. In fact, we could, let's just cancel that. Let me just pull out a little bit more, and then let's just go, what the heck, let's go really big. See if it will. So we do something like that. Okay, so we're playing around. Again, I've got that little bit on the rule of thirds bit. So what we're doing now is we're taking part of the picture, we've got the mug, but we're going to create a whole mass of space around it. Now this again becomes something where what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a balance, so that everything doesn't overwhelm everything else. Now it's giving us 3 different options, which are all, don't like either of those. I think actually I like the first one best. So here now what we've done is we've got the mug, we've got the shadow of the mug, and we've got a great big space around it. Okay, which in some ways is emphasizing the mug. In other ways is actually maybe emphasizing the shadow slightly more. But then because the shadow is coming off the mug, I think the shadow still acts as support to the mug, but it does change the balance slightly. So as well as having done all these other bits, we're now at a point whereby we are we're playing with the edit to give this space. Okay, this is again changing how we're perceiving it. This mug isn't really about, oh, nice cup of coffee. This mug is about creating something you might even want to print up and stick on your wall, or you might stick into a competition about minimalism, right? And again, I mean, I think there's a slight hint of colour in this one, but because it was a colour photo, it's just everything at this angle happens to be sort of very dark and white. You could very easily drop this into black and white, and then as Robert says, black and white, another option. Okay, so what else can we do? You could play around with colour. Okay, so close that. My trusty old espresso cup, which most of you will have seen many times before. So at this point, we've gone from an overhead one. This is a cup rather than a mug. And we've really gone with the notion of colour and colour contrast. So we're going for the complementary colours of orange and blue. Okay, so a bright orange and a blue background. But we can do colour shifts with that, and we can have yellow and purple. Okay, so this is still about the cup, it's about the espresso cup, but we've also really decided to play around with the colour. Black and white version, I know I've shown you this before, some of you have seen it, where we even decide to go a bit yin-yang. You can kind of have a bit of fun with it. Or what you might decide to do is, what other options have we got here? This one. Okay, so here we've got an espresso cup and an old battered mocha pot. Okay, so at this point we're kind of starting to create a still life with our cup. or we decide to combine it. In this case, we've got a pen, a pencil, an eraser, and a Sudoku puzzle. Okay, start thinking though, how different would this be if this was, say, with a Times crossword? Would you view it slightly different? What if it was on a stained tablecloth? What if there was a crumbled biscuit or cookie next to it, or a slice of cake? That you can see now that all these things would change your perception of the mug. Okay, still life again. We've seen this one before. Here we've got the cup. This is as much though about the mocha pot and the coffee beans as it is about the cup, but it's still giving you an idea that the cup can take a dominance. Or another option here, where do we go? Let's take this one. Okay, so this one, being the cover of the this week's episode. This one I took in a cafe, the Kakubri Galleries in Kakubri, and here I'm playing. This was actually, we were just coming out of lockdown. You still had to wear masks when you went into a cafe, at least when you were standing up, not when you were sitting down. And we had to fill in a little form to say what our telephone number was, so that if suddenly everybody started going down with COVID after having been there, they could contact you to say, get yourself tested. And so there's this little piece of paper and a pen. Now, in a way, this has become dated, but for some of us, if you may still remember that that was a thing in certain places. But what have I done here? I've got the cup, but I tried to give it much more of a context. So I'm in there having a coffee and I'm thinking, oh, I quite like the way that yellow is in the background, but I've got a kind of bluish shift from the window light coming in and lighting this up. I get down low with my camera, pull in the diagonals. So what am I doing here? I've got a cup in a cafe, but now I'm deliberately using techniques like the use of diagonals, like the use of light difference in the background to the foreground, so your eye gets taken through to the back, that there's little bits of interest that you start looking around. So I'm starting to use all the techniques. I've added a vignette to here, and because that's darkened down these edges because there was a bit too much light on here, so that essentially what we're doing is we're using that notion of containment that I've talked about before, so that the eye doesn't fall out of the side of the photo, so it's going in. So we're starting to really build up a number of compositional and lighting techniques. Okay, so we've got a whole raft of compositional techniques at our disposal, and it's not all about rule of thirds. I mean, how often do I talk about rule of thirds? Bits here and there, but it's only one of the compositional tools you've got. In this case, we're not really using it too much. Other than that, this is in the bottom third, I suppose, of the picture, but I've not got it off to one side. Instead, the dominant compositional techniques and tools here are point of view, our focal point, so that the cup is in focus but the background isn't. So there's aperture, there's technical things. There's the use of diagonals, using by creating that kind of triangular perspective sense, so that we've got diagonal to the table, but the saucer itself, which was sort of slightly more squarish if you were looking at it from above, becomes more diagonal, and the use of the teaspoon, because it's a wide angle lens I'm using, is distorting, and the walls are going slightly diagonal out there. We're using a kind of a colour thing here where the whites are more bluish in the foreground but they're yellowish in the background. So we're using multiple compositional techniques here, but it's still about a cup. It's still about a cup of coffee, right? It's still something which we use every day. If we're sitting in the cafe, we're more interested in getting our caffeine fix, or maybe if we happen to be in there with somebody, the company that we're in. The coffee is just a small bit part in our story. What we're doing here is we're taking it from being a bit part player to becoming the leading role. Okay? And then to come right back to sometimes, and almost, what kind of kick-started part of this was this photo, right? And this is a cup in the sink ready to be washed. Okay, now what happened was I glanced down. This is the same sink, the same bit of kitchen. The window light is from behind, but because I was starting to think about this notion of cups, I looked down into the sink and I saw the cup. Now at this point, it wasn't quite at this angle. I think the handle was leaning over to the right or lost in the soap suds, and so I thought, well, there's something here. So I kind of fiddled around, pulled it up. It started to roll over. I wedged it behind with, I can't either push it against the side of the sink, or there might be a teaspoon underneath there somewhere to hold it in the place that I wanted. But I knew what I did want was I wanted the handle to come out at an angle. So we have this diagonal of the handle going up into the corner. We've got this rather nice curve. We've got a relatively narrow depth of focus, so that we've got the bubbles along this line are nice and sharp. Right up to this bit really is where the focal point is. So where the bubbles, where the handle meets the edge of the cup, we've got sharp bubbles, and then they disappear out of focus quite quickly. And we've got backlight. Remember backlight? Photographer's secret weapon. Okay? And all this is a mug ready to be washed up. Okay? We've all seen this 1,000 times through our life. And yet, take a moment, play with the light, understand the composition, and I really like this photo. You could practically print this up and stick it on a wall. It becomes artistic, it becomes interesting, it becomes, you take a little bit longer over it. You're looking now at this mug in a way that you will never have taken the time to look at a mug like this before. So this is ultimately what this is all about, okay, is that it is only partly about the thing itself. It is, photography is about how we're making the thing look. What does this look like as a photograph? And we have all these tools at our disposal. We have all these compositional tools, like rule of thirds, use of diagonals, leading lines, notions of containment, echoes, colour balances, colour complementary colours, aperture, shutter speed. All these are sitting at our disposal to create narrative, story, mood, feel. What is it that somebody else, when looking at this photo, what are you transmitting to them when they look at it? Are they going to get a sense of, fancy a cup of coffee? Or, I'd like to buy that mug. Or, I hadn't seen it that way. There's something quite meditative about this. Or there's something quite anxiety-inducing about this. Or what is it? There's something that's going to move across. So this is really what I mean by the back to basics. Bookmark this particular episode if you want. Come back to it whenever you're in the future and you're thinking, what am I doing with photography? What's the point of it? How do I begin? Take a look at this. If you can take something as mundane and everyday as a mug, regardless of whether it's got a logo on it, and you can find a dozen different ways to make it interesting, you can do that with anything. Okay? So you can do that with a pencil, you can do that with a cardboard tube, you can do that with a piece of string, you can do that with a rolled up scrumpled piece of paper. Okay? Once you start introducing light, composition, and all these kind of things, you can make anything look interesting or compelling or to hold the attention for more than half a second. So, hope you found that a little bit interesting. As we take a couple of looks at a couple more comments here. April says, I love the bubbles in this shot. And Sandra says, who knew washing up could look so good? Excellent. Okay. Right. I hope you found that interesting. On the back of this, I will say it again at the end of the podcast. I'm going to set a challenge. I'm setting a challenge for 2 weeks' time. And it's just straightforwardly going to be the cup challenge. So cup or mug, drinking vessel. Okay. Will be a cup challenge. And so in 2 weeks' time, I want you to submit an image of a cup. Now, I'm not doing a podcast next week. I have a really busy, especially second half of next week. By the time I get to, I'm going to be doing an all-day shoot on Friday and an all-day shoot on Saturday. Sunday, I'm going to be wiped out. On top of that, Sunday also happens to be Mother's Day here in the UK. So if any of you are based in the UK and you've forgotten that, there's a wee reminder. Next Sunday is Mother's Day. So there won't be one next Sunday, but there will be one on the following. So not on the 10th, but on the 17th. And on the 17th, then will be the cup challenge. So you have 2 weeks. So grab a cup, whether it's your favourite cup, whether it's a broken cup. I mean, it might even be some kind of cup that was made on some little ceramics pottery course and you filled it with a bunch of pens. Okay? Pens, ruler, there's even a pencil sharpener in there as well. I don't think all those pens work either. Quite dusty too. What could you do with that? Okay, again, change your angle, change the lighting, change your background, change your content, and you've got a bunch of different photos. And what I would really say to you is try and take 6 different interesting photos of your cup. But only send in one, okay? But try out. So set yourself a little task here. Say, how can I take 6 different photos of a cup, right? Where are you going to place it? What angle are you going to do with it? What lighting are you going to do? Set yourself the challenge. Really, genuinely try and do this. And then when you've taken 6 different photos, how might you edit them up? And then pick your best. And your best one of those 6, send that in for the cup challenge. Okay? So that's really, if you really want to develop your eye and develop your sense of photography, this is probably almost like the ultimate episode for you and the ultimate challenge for you. Take a mug or a cup, make it look interesting, but do this. Do try out half a dozen different ways of taking it. And then when you've taken them and you've edited them, send me your best one. Okay? But just the one, don't send me all 6. Right? Right. Okay. So, let's move on then. So, a little reminder here that if you happen to find these podcasts useful, interesting or entertaining and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Another way you could do it is find me a sponsor. Find me a sponsor who's prepared to pay me lots of money to do these podcasts, and I'll never ask you for a coffee again. Right, okay. Smug Points. Yes, that's right. We're now into March. So we needed to have, who was the winner? Who gained the most Smug Points from February? And the winner of February Smug Points, drum roll. Let me just set that up at the ready. The winner was Susan. So Susan got 85 Smug Points in February. VG was runner-up there with 80 and Marilyn came in third with 75. So congratulations to Susan as our Smug Points winner for February. Now, in terms of the quarterly runnings that we've got, that shifting place there's a little kind of jostle at the top end here. VG is now currently running first with 140 Smug Points. Susan is second with 135. Janet with 130. April with 120. And then Marilyn and Robert are both at about 100 or 105. Okay, so everything to play for. So one more month. So now we've got March. Who's going to be the leader of Marches? But whoever accumulatively has won the most over the 3 months, what we will then do, I'll get in touch with you and we will organise a podcast specifically for you on whatever topic you want, but based around your pictures. We can have a think about what would you most want to learn about? What photos have you got that you would most like help with? This is your grand prize of if you are the quarterly winner. So we'll have 4 of these across the year, where the person who gathers the most Smug Points in the 3 months section, we will have a podcast dedicated specifically on what you would like and looking specifically at your photos. Nobody else gets a look in. It's all about you and your images. So, like I say, currently VG, Susan and Janet are in the top 3, with April, Marilyn and Robert running a close behind. But it's all still to play for. We still have, even though there isn't one next week, because it's a 31-day month, we still have four Sundays. So still plenty to play for, to put in your images for critique, to take part in the challenges, to recommend friends, all these kind of things, ways that you can earn the points. Right, so yes, congratulations again, Susan. So now we're just moving on to the last part. Now, the next bit I wanted to talk about was the notion of the eclipse. So Janet in Canada said to me, do you have any suggestions for those of us with a chance to shoot the solar eclipse in April? Okay, so I was looking at this, and kind of North Central America overlapping central southern Canada, there's going to be a total eclipse somewhere, I can't remember, at the beginning of, in about a month's time anyway, somewhere around the kind of 5th, 6th of April. Google it, you'll find it easily enough. And what Janet did was she sent a picture of a particular filter to put on the front of your lens and said, would this filter be any good? And what I realised when she said that was, April said it's April the 8th. Okay, so what I realised when she said that was actually that's not, if I can just say yes or no, but that doesn't really answer the question. When you come to photographing the eclipse, whether it's a partial or total, there are certain things that you need to take into consideration. And so I thought it's worth running through a couple of these first of all. Because what I also asked Janet what camera she was using, and she said she's got a Nikon D300 with an 18-200 lens. Okay, so she's basically, if she's trying to zoom in as best as she can, Janet will have a 200mm lens to shoot. Now, the first thing to say about photographing the sun is never, ever, ever look through the lens finder. Okay, do not look through the lens finder when you're pointing your camera at the sun, especially even more so when you've got a zoom lens on, because you are magnifying the rays of the sun, and you will fry your eyeballs. You will make yourself blind. Okay, there's you know, I mean, you probably know this already, but I still have to say it because it's the, you know, you don't want to make yourself blind because you just weren't thinking and you just were trying to measure up on where to put, and you happen to look through the viewfinder without thinking about it. It's really dangerous. Even without the zoom lens, even without your camera, you shouldn't be staring directly into the sun without adequate protection, like really thick sunglasses. Okay. Now, when it comes to your camera, if you're trying to photograph the sun, there's two things I want to talk about here. One is size, of relative size of the sun compared to the rest of the picture. And the other is your kind of camera settings and your filter. So what you've got to bear in mind is that the light is coming into your lens, is getting magnified before it hits the sensor. So there's always a potential problem that you might fry your sensor if too much light gets in, right? And when you're photographing the sun, the strongest flash that you can buy, or strobe you can buy for your camera, is nothing like as strong as the power of the sun. Okay, even though it's 93 million miles away, it's still very powerful. So if your sensor is exposed to strong sunlight for too long, then you will fry your sensor. There is even the problem that actually having your camera pointing at the sun, even if you haven't gone click and you haven't done anything yet, if you've got the cap off and it's there just sitting there waiting for everything to happen for long enough, I've heard that, you know, if you've got a particularly strong zoom lens, which is particularly strong magnification, it will actually could start warping, heating up and warping your aperture blades underneath. So there's a good chance of potentially frying your camera. Janet's put, the risk is the reason I plan to use my backup camera rather than my primary camera. That's probably a good idea, to be honest, yes. Now, all that taken into consideration, filter, stick a filter on the front. A filter is the equivalent of like sticking sunglasses on the front, but it's not just about dark and light. It's also potentially about the notion of the ultraviolet rays. And whilst you can buy different kind of neutral density filters, what I would really suggest is you look for a solar there are specific solar filters you can buy, and these are coated such to reduce particular ultraviolet wavelengths and what have you that are likely to be most damaging to your sensor. So double check that. Look up the idea of a solar filter for your camera, and that's probably going to give you the best chance of reducing any damage. Now, having said that, and just to say, just before I get to that point, which is, if you are not looking through the actual viewfinder, use, most cameras have some kind of display on the back. So look through that, look at that, not through that. Okay. Now, where was I going? Yes. In reality, if you're pointing your camera, what you do is go for a very, very fast shutter speed. So you're going to click. If you're doing 8,000th of a second, you're limiting the amount of light that's going to get in. You want a very, very low ISO, as low as you can go. Get a 100 ISO. If you have a camera that goes down to 50, get a 50 ISO. That's going to limit the amount of light that hits the lens. And then go for a narrow aperture. Okay, you don't want a wide aperture, go narrow. Now, some lenses will go up to an f/22, some will go to an f/28, some will even do an f/32, depending on the... Now, what might have to take into consideration here is not all lenses function their best at the extreme ends of their aperture range. Okay, so sometimes, whilst it might go to an aperture of 32 or f/32, you might lose something in the clarity. So what you need to do then is experiment. Okay, experiment and play long before this ever happens. Get a tripod, slow shutter speed, shoot something ordinary, or the other thing to do is shoot the moon, photograph the moon. Okay, and practice on the moon, because the moon is pretty much exactly the same size as the sun. This is why eclipses occur. If the moon was much bigger than the sun, it would happen all the time. If it was much smaller, we wouldn't notice it. It's this weird 1 in a billion chance, or whatever it is, that our moon happens to be 400 times smaller, but 400 times further, closer, or whatever it is, than the sun. So you can practice on the moon. Now, one of the key things to remember here, where did I put that? If I go to my little Eclipse folder here, and let me just show you something here. Wrong one. Again. Right, flip over here. So here's a photo of the moon, right? And this photo was taken with a 200mm lens. Okay, so exactly the same as essentially that you've got. And what I want to point out here is that this is a photo of the moon as far zoomed in as I can possibly get. But what we can see is that there's a lot of space around it. Okay, and if I digitally zoom in, because when we see pictures, these wonderful pictures of the moon, or these pictures of the eclipse with the corona, around it, and it looks so great, we tend to see pictures which fill the screen like this. And in this case, probably the moon's taking up about 25, possibly even 30% of what we're seeing, and it's got black around it. Okay, and that's what we're going to see. But for us, when we've zoomed in this far, we don't have that detail. We don't have those beautiful crisp edges to all the craters and everything else. Where's it gone? And that's because actually that's as far as we can go. And how much is that? Well, if let's open this in Photoshop. And what I've got here is, this is pretty much about 5,200 pixels wide by roughly about 3,400 pixels high. Now, how big is this moon? If I drag that to the edge there, and I drag that to the edge there, and what we can see, 2,400 to about 2. This is roughly about, let's say, round it up to 400 pixels wide. Okay, so 400 pixels wide, and this is 5,200 pixels across. So you could fit 13 of them across the length. You could fit another 8 of them down the height. So essentially, you could fit 104 or more moons into this. So what we're saying really here is that this moon is taking up 1%. You could easily fit over 100 of these into this space. So this moon is only taking up 1% of the entire picture. Okay, so trying to get that maximum kind of detail with a 200mm lens is going to be really limited. And it's important to understand that from the start. That the ones where you see them filling the screen, even if this was a 600mm lens, we would, it would be 3 times larger, which would take up 3% of the screen. Okay, 1200mm lens. Now we're kind of talking, right? We're going to get a much better thing. But a 1200mm lens, those things cost an absolute fortune for one thing, even if you could hire one. And then people have got bits like extra bits which they stack on top of multipliers and what have you. That's how they're doing it. You also shove it on a tripod to make sure that you've got maximum stability. So understanding then that actually there's this thing about understanding your limitations of what you can do with a photo. Now, a few years ago, there was a partial eclipse here in Scotland, and there was desperation to run around and take the photos. And I remember thinking, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do here? I desperately want to take it. I didn't have any kind of filter for a lens, but a friend of mine lent me a 10-stop ND filter, and I thought that'll be great. And I set up in my garden, and the cloud came over. It was cloudy. However, the cloud broke just enough at the right time, and I ended up with this photo. Except, so this is the sun mostly covered by the moon. And it's a pretty fuzzy photo, and it's not great at all. And what happened here was, because there was already cloud cover, and I had this on the lens, this neutral density filter, I've got an f-stop of 3.5. I've gone really wide. I'm at 100th of a second, and I've got an ISO of 2000. Right, so it actually ended up being really noisy, and it wasn't very great. So actually, what I ended up taking the ND filter off because the cloud cover was already stopping it. And when I took the ND filter off, I could play around then with the different aperture settings, go for a faster shutter speed and a narrower aperture, and that was perfectly fine. I didn't have to worry about an ND filter. But the other thing was I realised, well, what have we got here? All we've got is a sliver in the sky. I mean, do we even know that that's the sun? You can see now, I mean, talk about the 1% of the picture, but that sliver is even a fraction of 1%. We've got to zoom right in before we can start to guess what it is. And you only really know it's the sun because I've told you it's the sun. So then I thought, well, actually, really what I need to do is I need to put it next to something. So what I did was I played around, and I moving backwards and forwards. And after a little bit of playing around, you can see now the moon started to move across, so the sun's starting to show in a slightly different place. But I had the chimney. There was a chimney stack, in the garden. I was in the garden, and so I came in close, and I thought, well, let's give it something relative to stick it next to. And actually, that I felt made it slightly more interesting. Okay, so sometimes, well, if you can't actually get the full thing, what might be more interesting is to get a context for it. Now, what you might want to do is even go wide angle. Think about a landscape with interesting trees and loch and lake or reflections. Get an interesting landscape, and then think, what would that landscape look like with the moon, with the eclipse in it? Okay, so that might require a bit of planning as well. If you know what time of day the eclipse is going to be, go out and find a really interesting landscape place and check where the sun is going to be at that time of day. Bearing in mind that in a month's time it will be slightly higher in the sky, but you can work all that lot out and set yourself up there ready to watch it, so that you're maybe going to get the reflections in the lake, or you're going to get silhouettes of trees or things like that. Okay, have a think about that. Then what happened was I was trying to take a couple of shots like this, and I suddenly noticed in this one where I'm focused, that my focal point is the sun, so that's nice and sharp, and I suddenly noticed this crow sitting on the and I thought, oh, that looks like fun. I've got to play around a little bit more with that. So I needed a deeper aperture for this. So then I kind of went to, what have we got here? This is a So I've gone full f32 on that, which actually I think wasn't totally sure. The sun eclipse is happening up here. I've got a sharper bit, but then the crows just weren't. They would periodically appear, and then by the time I'd go and click, they disappeared. But I ended up. I got this one, which I was really quite. This is unedited. Quite like the shape of the crow as it was just kind of coming into land. The best one that I got, and then I've got this one where you've just got just the outline of the head there, but that wasn't quite enough. My favourite one was this one. Okay, the problem with this one was that there are multiple crows, but you can barely see them. So you open this with Photoshop, and the settings I've got on this one are, what are we at? I've got it 5,000th of a second, f32, ISO 100. But I've kind of overcooked it. I've gone too dark. The problem was that if I was any brighter than this, but as you can see, the sun itself now is really tending to creep out. So I would have lost that. That got blown if I had any more light coming in. But then it did mean that I'd really lost the silhouettes. But we come into here, so then maybe I click auto, I kind of brighten it up a bit. Now you can start to see the other crows a bit more, but I've got to be careful how much I boost the exposure, because again, I start losing that. And I pull the highlights down, and this starts to then become a bit interesting. Okay. However, the next problem that we have is the noise is absolutely terrible in this. Because I've had to brighten it so much, and I can go into the detail and I can drag the luminance up and I can try and get rid of the color noise, but to be honest, I mean, it's now getting maybe a little bit soft, and I can play around with that. And in the end, I think my final edited version of it was this, and I've still never been totally happy with this, and I will keep periodically going back and revisiting it, but it was a lot of work, never really quite got me what I wanted. Would have been easier on this if I'd managed to get this when it was slightly more of a sliver, and I'd managed to have the crows slightly brighter to begin with. But the point is that actually something like this with the crows and the chimney and the eclipse is a far more interesting photo than this one, which is just a sliver. And so this is what it comes down to, Janet. That if there's a notion of take a photo of the eclipse, and maybe it'll just be a fuzzy little line, or maybe you'll kind of get a sense of it. But if it's just isolated in the sky, now maybe, and it's only taking up 1% of your entire photo. Now, if it's just a reminder to say, hey, I was there and I had to go at this, then that's fine. That's all you need. If you're trying to create something a little bit more, actually, I want to see what I can create, which will be interesting. What I would say is this idea of what can you do as well as the eclipse, okay? So that it's not only the eclipse sitting in the sky, but you've got a location. And the other thing to do, I would say, is really practice with the moon. Also go out to the same locations when the moon is likely to be in roughly the same place as where the sun is going to be. And how does the light reflect on that? Now, you might be doing slightly longer exposures, you might be needing to play around, but you can at least get a sense of where the light is likely to come from and how it's going to interact with the environment. Because you also don't want to be in an environment whereby there's all these lovely little bits of trees and everything here, but the sun is so high up that it's sort of shot out of where your screen is likely to be. You want to have that sun very close to, in terms of inside the photograph, next to these other interesting elements that you're going to be putting in, whether it's a particular kind of building or nature, trees, cliffs, mountains, reflecting water, any of these things. So really, when it comes to your eclipse photography, if you've got the super 1200mm lens plus multipliers to put onto it, then that's great. That's a whole bunch of things, and I don't have experience of that. I would say go Google it. You will find various bits and pieces out there. But my biggest piece of advice would be, with a 200mm lens, if that's as big as you can go, then look for other ways of maybe photographing your eclipse. But rule number one, never ever ever look through your eyepiece with it. Always use your view screen. Make sure you're wearing appropriate eye protection as well. And then may the photography gods be with you and on your side, and that it's not a completely overcast day and chucking it down with rain. So Anyway, I hope that's useful. I hope that helps. But thank you for sending that in. And it was interesting for me to go off and kind of revisit my old photos. I know now I would do things differently. The problem is at the time, I am just so rapidly changing my camera settings, desperately trying to work out, get the balance of light and everything else. I didn't do enough research beforehand. That was several years ago. There's not been another opportunity for me to update it. So hopefully you can learn some of the lessons of the mistakes that I made at the time. And that will help you with your opportunity next month. Right, okay. Comments here. April says, sounds crazy, never knew. Sandra said, didn't realise it could be so dangerous. Janet says, I believe the filter I linked to is supposed to be a solar filter. Well, okay, if it's got that and it's a reasonable make and got a reputation, then that should be fine. April says, I think I have a crazy sun shot made by the Canadian fires last year that looked sci-fi. Yeah, if you've got all the smoke and everything coming up from the fires, then that's going to really kind of create, that will give you, again, the smoke, like the clouds there, will act as a certain filter. Be prepared to make very, very rapid changes to your aperture and your shutter speed and your ISO to be able to adapt to the situation. Janet says, is there any website that will give me an idea of the direction of the sun at a given time of day? Probably. I'm not aware of one directly. But in a way, if you know, first of all, find out what time the eclipse is going to be happening. Because if the eclipse is happening at 12 noon, it will be directly south. Okay? Or actually, no, tell a lie. Bear in mind that the clocks will go forward. You're in daylight savings time zone. So 1 o'clock, if it's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then it will be absolutely directly south. And then before 1 o'clock, it's going to be one way. After 1 o'clock, it's going to be another way. So you can, if you know your maps and you know how to read maps and you know how to draw lines, you know how to play around with angles, you can work these things out. I've got a friend who does all this kind of stuff. He goes off and does landscape photography, and he plans these a long time beforehand, has a geographical map of wherever it is he's going, works out, has got these bits of paper that he overlays, which say where the angle of the sun is and how high up it will be at different times of the year. I'm sure there are probably apps for this somewhere. Not my personal experience, but the information will be out there. Okay, Janet says, I plan to go out scout locations next weekend. Peter says, sun call. Okay, check out sun call. That could be something to do. Oh, Ennis has joined us and says, I have similar shots, probably from the same eclipse. I ended up shooting the camera and tripod with second handheld camera. Janet's come back. 3:15 to 3:20 p.m. Okay, so now you know that you will be able to find out what angle compared to south. So you'll be moving into southwest will be the direction that it's coming in. Okay, you're getting into the afternoon. Although the sun is getting higher, it won't be at peak height in the sky, it will be slightly lower. So again, towards it, get out there, certainly the week before, see where the sun is at about 3 o'clock, make sure that, and how high it is in the sky, so how far forward or back you need to be, so where the sun would be in relation to whatever parts of the landscape you would like it to be in. Oh, and Peter says the app is called SunCal. SunCal rather than SunCall. So Cal, yeah, it'll be Cal for calculator. Okay, thank you very much for that, Pete. Right, so hope that you found that interesting. Hope you found that useful. So, little reminder then. Next week there will not be a podcast. Okay, so the next podcast will be on the 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day. So for those of you who are not worrying about it as well, you know, either those of you who are with Irish heritage or are Irish, or just like any excuse for getting drunk on Guinness, I might not see you. For those of you who want to prioritise, or maybe if you're just doing that in the evening, you want to still be here. But you can still enter the challenge, right? There will be smug points to be won, and don't forget there is the Smug Points Leaderboard still to be still going. And so for 2 weeks' time, the cup challenge, send me your photo of a cup. Go back, think about everything that I've said. Really, what I really want you to do is take 6 different photos. How can you make a cup interesting? Think about, take it from different points of view, take it under different lighting conditions, take it with different backgrounds, take it with different content, And it's really important. If you try this, if you physically move your cup, if you physically change your location, if you physically put different things in it, if you physically change your lighting with it, you are building muscle memory, you are building brain memory. And then take your 6 best photos, edit them, try and make your best 6 photos, a nice little sequence. And then out of those 6, send me your best. Okay. This, if understanding photography is here to try and help you improve your photography, then absolutely doing these things rather than going, yep, sounds good, I'm never going to do it. Fine, you can do that. I have no control over your life. But if you genuinely want to improve your photography, take this exercise, do this exercise, and then send me your best cup image for less than 2 weeks. Don't leave it until Sunday in 2 weeks' time. I won't have time. Certainly get it to me by the Friday the 15th, preferably before. The earlier you can get it to me, the easier it is for me to organise and sort out these podcasts and arrange what order I'm going to show the photos in. But like I say, smug points to be won. So thank you ever so much for turning up, joining in the comments, coming up with bits of information. Hope you found this all useful and interesting. If you have, do consider supporting it with buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, finding me a sponsor and dragging your friends along. Enjoy the next 2 weeks. If you're a mother, enjoy Mother's Day. If you have a mother that you can pass on, enjoy that too. And I look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. Right, okay. I should really have set this bit up in advance. That bit. Yes. Okay. Take care. Enjoy your I'm looking forward to seeing what you create. Enjoy creating. See you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.